You people are not watching enough television.
I see myself.
The way those men treated that poor girl.
Fortunately, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I cannot believe I am in this conversation.
Everything he says means something else, too.
How can he pretend that she never existed?
I don't like feeling like this.
No one does.
That's not what I'm talking about, my dear. Don't waste your youth on age.
Welcome to Mad Men. Manly man. I tend to drone on and on sometimes, kind of like this episode of Mad Men. Hey, welcome to Mad Men, weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 until 2015, gearing our conversation around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and other things that make us mad. And also, I didn't even realize this when we initially set out to do this whole thing, that it is the 15-year anniversary of the first season when we were doing this. I guess kind of coincidentally, timing-wise, worked out.
Happy birthday, Mad Men.
Yeah, that's it. Mad Men is officially a teenager.
Yeah.
Growing on up. Kind of like Sally Draper, maybe, who we might see more of on the show. Who knows? I want to keep it a little bit, vague for people who haven't watched. But anyway, I'm Jon Negroni, back. We took a little bit of a break. I mean, people won't notice this when they listen because we're a few episodes ahead. But I'm just getting back into podcasting things, and with me, it's first Will Ashton. Hey, Will, you heard his voice?
Hey, welcome back, John.
Hey, and then of course Michael Overholst. Michael, how's it going?
It's going so great, John. I'm trying to keep my blood pressure down. Just ready to fight you about this episode. I don't appreciate you already throwing in that droning comment, but
you're against drone warfare. I know that. I
am absolutely. I'm more about that hand-to-hand combat kind of thing.
Same, actually, but Will kind of gave it away. I told Will this in confidence. I was like, "Hey, Will, don't tell Mike this. Please keep it a secret." And then Will was like, "Of course, John, you can trust me."
Yeah.
And I told him, I was like, "This is my least favorite episode of the season. One of my least favorite episodes of all of Mad Men." And you're not okay with that, Mike? You seem upset.
Well, I didn't know this information. I get done watching the episode, and I text the group saying, "Wow, I forgot how good of an episode this was." And it was like, I don't know, it was the best news Will had ever heard, because it turns out he loves to instigate fights. Like, you look at him smirking right now, knowing the fight he caused.
Yeah, I was a little rascal.
Will's a bit of a chef in the kitchen, As soon as he has a reason, he sees some spices on the shelf, he's ready to toss them in.
I mean, look, we have like 90-something.
Stir the pot.
We have 90-something of these episodes we have to do, right? I want at least a couple of them to get a little spicy to keep things interesting.
People remember, that was one long weekend. Felt like it, didn't it? And we're not recording this on a long weekend, but we're about to have, because of Labor Day, right? And that's when this episode takes place, right? It's the Labor Day long weekend. Mike's shaking his head as if I'm just like, yeah, duh.
There's an election coming up, John. It's Labor Day.
Well, yeah, the election of 1960, and also, in our case, the midterm election. So, it's usually we have off-year elections and everything, but again, the timing just seems to work out. But we're talking about episode 10 now. Mike, we missed you for Red in the Face, or not? Wait, were you on for Red in the Face, or the last episode was Shoot, and then before that, Hobo Code, before that, Red in the Face. So I'm all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I like to, how actors, they do one for themselves, they do one for their fans. I'm like that with this podcast, I do one for me where I don't show up. I do one for you where I do. It's, kind of on and off.
Which one was for me? And I guess this one, because this is the one where you're just like, well, hold on, I can't miss my opportunity to throw John away.
No, this one's for all of our listeners, the groupies who just always want to tell you off.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, you're here to do that. This episode, as we mentioned, it's we have a long weekend coming up. The office is shutting down Sterling Cooper. This is one of those episodes that takes place over the course of really just a day or even less than a day. It's one of those rare episodes. This is also one of the few episodes that doesn't end with a song. It actually just kind of ends with the soundtrack. So a very unique episode. It was directed by Tim Hunter. and it has 4 writers. I think this is the most, the highest amount of writers we've had so far on the show, but each one of these writers has done an episode before. So Bridget Bedard, who did Red in the Face, maybe that's what I was thinking. This is her second episode that she's done. I also forgot to mention Tim Hunter previously did Red in the Face as well, also New Amsterdam. And then we also have Andre Jacques Metten and Maria Jacques Metten, who they both co-wrote Babylon. So this is them coming back. And Matthew Weiner has a credit on this episode as well. So lots of cooks in the kitchen. Some would call that a complaint, but I have a feeling Will and Mike are sort of being like, oh yeah, you're describing the thing that I like about the episode is its perspectives for days.
Yeah, my guess is that it's because each of them have had such, are responsible for like different parts of the main storyline. And I felt like you got a lot of intertwining and development for multiple things, right? You have what's going on with Roger and Joan, Roger himself, with Dawn, with Betty, and then, you even get a little bit of, what I can only think of Joan's name. Anyways.
Yeah, Christina Hendricks, or wait, are you trying to think of somebody else? Peggy, Carol?
Yeah, I was trying to get to Peggy. I couldn't get Peggy.
Okay, yeah. One of the main characters of the series, yeah.
Yeah, has she become important in the show?
Yeah. She only gets like 2 scenes in this. One's super, super brief. The other is pretty memorable with Pete. But should I just get out of the way why I don't like this episode, or should we just do that?
I mean, certainly
get it off your chest.
I'm certainly curious.
I don't think it all comes together. Now, look, there's good stuff in here. There's a clear through line. I think the main theme of this episode is about seeing other people through other people, the idea of being a self-made person, the differing interrelational relationships, or whatever that word is, the interrelationships, that's it, between the people in the office. All that stuff it's fine, it's solid. This has some of my least favorite scenes in the season. I really don't like some of the scenes in this, and I just think that the movie stuff really bothers me. And I know Will's going to be like, well, hold on, John, 2 of your favorite movies of all time get brought up in here. The Apartment is my favorite movie ever. It's tied with my number 1. And La Dolce Vita is my top 5. It's my number 5 favorite movie of all time. And this movie, this episode directly calls The Apartment. It's basically taking The Apartment and sort of like redoing it in a way, in a sense. True. And with La Dolce Vita, it plays out a scene from the movie, basically. So like, what gives? Yeah. And I just don't think it all comes together. I just think that it's very disjointed. To me, it feels like 4 different writers kind of battling each other. Like, I just don't find the different storylines to really connect super well together. And I kind of I feel like you kind of have to force it. And I also think the movie stuff is just way too on the nose. Like, it's annoying to me. Like, I'm watching this episode and it's just like, especially in the last shot with Joan as the elevator operator. And it's like, we get it. Like, okay, like, yes, The Apartment is a movie that exists. And it's just so, I don't know, over the top to me. But I mean, Will, doesn't seem like you agree.
It's not that I disagree. I'm just kind of surprised because, like you were saying, I would think because The Apartment is not only reference but the framework for this episode, and like you said, there's La Dolce Vita. There's a lot of movies in here. I would think, this would be.
Joan brings up a bunch, yeah.
Yeah, I would think this would be up your alley. But it sounds like because the episode is maybe not as sturdy narratively as the others, that you feel the references and the homages kind of add insult to injury because they're not living up to these films that you love. Like, you think there's a much better
it's referencing
episode.
Them, but it's not doing much with them.
Because it sounds like if this like really for you like nailed it, this would be like a top 5 episode of Mad Men for you. It just doesn't quite match those expectations. So because it falls short, it stings a little bit more. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. I mean, I'm taking it as I see it, right? Because this is a show with lots of episodes about movies and with movies in them. So it definitely gets it right in other places. But for me, just not this one.
I really liked it. I know you called out the Joan scene at the end. I just think what a little fun moment of her saying that she's becoming the character, or she's so scared about becoming the character in the elevator or in the apartment. And she literally becomes the white woman elevator. operator at the end of the episode. It's a fun little moment.
Well,
Also,
Roger's the one who questions it. He's just like, "Oh, that's not realistic," and she's just sort of like, clearly she sees herself.
Her
as
life
Shirley
is
MacLaine.
becoming the movie. John, let me ask you this question: have you ever read a book? Do you like reading?
Once or twice.
Oh boy.
There's a small time author. He's pretty indie. I don't know if have you heard of Stephen King?
Yeah, not a fan.
So there's this thing that Stephen King does in a lot of his books with a lot of intertwining storylines, right? And it's this method of ratcheting up tension, within a larger course of work. And that's exactly what this episode was for me. I get what you're saying, and I hear the criticism of it. Instantly, it doesn't feel like it ever amounted to anything. But with where the season has gone, what we got in this episode, I think it ratchets up so much tension. It gives you so much that you've been waiting for. It was like, Don's reveal of his life at the end of the episode.
Exposition dump.
But when do you want it to happen, John? It has to happen for the end of this season to be as good as it is.
It's a sleepy delivery of the line. Jon Hamm's done much better. I think like bookending it with that is like, again, it's
I think you get really great performances. I think John Slattery in this episode.
No, this is Slattery at his best. And I think, I mean, like the whole moment between him and Mona, like considering that's his like real life wife and like the emotion there and all that stuff. Like, so Don has like an existential crisis in this episode, right? And I the idea is that up until this point, he's kind of looked down on Roger. He kind of like sees himself as the young buck. He thinks he's Kennedy. And then he's kind of seeing himself being like, I'm Nixon. I'm getting older. I'm aging. Like I'm right behind Roger. That's why he tells the pallbearer story, right? And so to me, that's an interesting way to go about it, but it just feels abrupt. And I guess that's the point. It's supposed to sort of just be like it all of a sudden without really seeing it coming. Don's just like, I'm getting older and it's all, downhill from here. But I guess there's just something missing for me. Like, how does that really connect like to the apartment stuff? And it's like, well, why are we invoking so many movies here? Why movies? Like, it feels like it was an idea for one writer to really nail that in. And then another writer was like, no, it's about, how Don sees himself as Nixon. Get it? Richard Nixon, Dick Whitman, same name. And then another writer is just like, well, hold on. Like, well, Roger, Roger's dying. Like, well, it just, it's a lot. It's a mess.
I mean, if I may, I don't want to kind of get in the middle of you two, considering how tensions are certainly mounting, much like this episode, you could say. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point, John, like it does kind of feel like a stew of an episode. Like obviously having 4 writers in here, it seems like Weiner's probably tying everything together. It's kind of like different ideas they had throughout the season that they decided to kind of clump together into this episode. It's not maybe quite as seamless or quite as organic as I think it could have been, certainly. But I think to Mike's point, it really is, I think, sold by those moments. Like, even though I don't love how they come together, it doesn't quite feel like it says organic. I do think the little moments really make the and it is like Mike is mentioning, it is kind of, there is clear tension being built. So it's not like, it's not like the sum of its parts entirely. Like there is clear craft in this episode. And even if this is one of the weaker episodes, I think it's a testament to this quality that, even if it's weaker than the other episodes, it's still better than the weakest episode of a lot of other shows. So I don't really get the anger, but I can understand, why
it's not
tensions
anger.
are mounting.
It's just a little bit of it's a little bit of frustration.
You hated it.
And again, it's like it's one of the best shows of all time, in my opinion. So it's like one of those things where my standards for it are pretty high. So like, yeah, it's like a B- episode of a really great show. So to me, the curve is a little bit skewed in some ways. Like again, like another thing, the whole like, okay, they're twins. And so the idea of like Roger and Don kind of being like twins, and then it's like being forced on Don as a sort of like, I'm like the mirror image of this guy Roger when I don't really want to be. And then also bringing up the Eisenhower thing of like he sees himself as like not really having any talent. I mean, there's a lot to get into here. So I don't know where you guys want to even like start with it.
I mean, there's so many moments in this episode. I hear what you're saying. And
yeah, I've been negative. Let's positive it up.
Those I really like the Eisenhower bit. Because of that pallbearer story, Don's thinking he's next up, considering that, and then immediately seeing a negative campaign, which they were wanting to do, so it's like hurting his work pride. But then him comparing himself and realizing, oh, I've never made a decision here. Like, I think that's great writing. I think it's great characterization, and I couldn't disagree with you more on the moments that made this episode great.
I do think that there's the whole early scene, right, where Don is sitting and he's just like, with Nixon, I see myself. And it's a very, very telling moment, especially because then you kind of see that Pete is like the Kennedy. He's literally like right there with him. He's the one who responds kind of thoughtfully to the Kennedy ad compared to like, you know, we all know like Harry Crane is going to dislike it because he's like such a bore. And everybody else is going to be all kind of stodgy about it, but Pete is kind of like the Kennedy in this situation. He's the young one, and then Don is just like, you know, they've mentioned it earlier in the season where, you know, Roger's telling him like, don't compete with Pete Campbell, right? And Don's like, well, I'm not. He's like, you are. Like there is this sort of reticence, this hesitancy that Don has when it comes to seeing himself as getting a bit older, right?
I do love, though, with Pete being that young version who's competing with, that they do keep giving him moments where, like, Pete's so close to actually being right, but then he just makes that one extra comment. What was it that you said in the meeting? We'll go down swinging. And you can tell that just does not land well with Roger. It's inexperienced to assume you're already going to lose. I love that Pete does that.
Yeah. It is one of those things where, like, he is right, but, like, nobody wants him to be right. Is more what it is. Like they're just kind of like all put off by him, and okay, well, what's something? I mean, it sounds like you kind of liked the episode,
sure,
a bit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, was there anywhere that you wanted to go with it? You know, positive wise.
I mean, for me, the highlights of the episode, I think, come down to primarily the Dawn scenes. I think Roger's segments, as we mentioned, John Slattery's performance really stands out here. I also admire the risks they sort of take with Roger as far as like making him a lot more weirder and grosser as a character. I mean, certainly we've seen this guy sort of degraded a number of times already, but I kind of admire the show for not being afraid to just kind of put him down bad in a number of scenarios. Sort of the bravery of the early episodes here impresses me. But as far as Don Draper is concerned, I mean, we have obviously dug into the character, but oftentimes when we explore Don, it's through like flashback, or it's through like him kind of recollecting things internally, more of an intuitive journey for him. But I like that this episode explores him kind of removing those layers in a more direct and honest way. I mean, obviously, this is a character who's never really comfortable being honest in any respect. And even when he is like at the end of this episode, like emotionally and physically naked, there is something that like he's still kind of holding back in some respects. But I really admire this show. Like, you know, obviously the dichotomy of Don's character here is kind of explored between him being this weird sort of mix of JFK and Richard Nixon. Even down, you know, him being literally Dick, hiding in another person, and the idea that like he on the surface has like a very like JFK kind of demeanor. He's very charismatic. He's very sexual. Like he's someone who is sort of promiscuous. He's someone that people readily like, but internally he is sort of a Richard Nixon type. And that's something that I think Matthew Zoller-Seitz kind of digs into in his chapter in his book about this episode, is like that ultimately he has sort of like that paranoia that Nixon has. He has that sort of desire to like want to prove himself. And he is someone who came from nothing and became something. And he has a story that feels very American, but he's also someone who needs to kind of hide behind someone else in order to be the person that he wants to be. And I do like that this episode allows us to see how dynamic of a character Don is, even though it's exploring things we have seen in other episodes, in some respects seen a little bit better. I do admire that this episode's a little bit more direct in exploring that in a way that allows Jon Hamm and his performance to really showcase his talents and explore that in different ways. So I think that's the stuff that really stands out to me. And I think that end scene, especially with him and Rachel, is one of the more standout moments that I've seen so far in this series.
I think, and I don't know if you're saying the same thing because it sounded like you weren't. To me, he is like the Don Draper persona is Kennedy, and the sort of like the who he really is literally Nixon.
Right.
Like he wants to be Kennedy, but he is like Nixon deep down.
Yeah.
I guess it sounded like you were kind of, to me, you were saying like, because there is a blending of the two, I guess, because Nixon being the self-made man, but Don Draper is not supposed to be the like humble beginnings guy. He's supposed to be the I actually like, am privileged, or I fit into this world. Like if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess if I didn't explain that properly, I apologize. But yeah, I mean, I think the stuff with Kennedy, as far as Don is concerned, is a more superficial thing. It's kind of the coding around him. As I think Matthew Zoller said, like it internally, he is that sort of Nixon personality. Like he's very paranoid. He is someone who came from nothing, became something, wants to
lies about who he is.
He lies about who he is. Exactly. Yeah. He's someone who's inherently dishonest, someone who has like an old fashioned mentality, even though he can have a sort of suave, charismatic side to him as well. So he is, I think, inherently sort of a blend of the two. But I mean, the Kennedy stuff is more superficial to the internal Nixon stuff that drives his character. And even though the like 50s turning over to 60s stuff can be a little on the nose, you're suggesting, not only with the Kennedy and Nixon ads, but also with some dialogue that Joan has midway through in the episode, I do appreciate how the show is kind of showing like he is a man of two different times, and whether or not he adapts to the changing of the tides is, I think, going to be inherent to the conflict, at least from where I'm standing. Obviously, you two know, obviously, but just watching this for, I guess, technically kind of the first and second time right now, that's what I'm appreciating.
The people know what happens in the 1960s if they were paying attention in history class. But of course, yeah. I mean, we know what happens in the rest of the show.
With Don,
yeah. So to me, like I mentioned this earlier, I think that there are three major storylines here. There's Joan's story, Roger's story, and Don's story. I think all three are kind of about being self-made, or sort of like where you find your worth and your motivation for what you do. Joan's is a little bit simpler, for her. It's about the performance. I guess that's where the movie stuff kind of comes in. It's her sort of seeing herself, am I Doris Day? Am I Kim Novak? But she can't like be herself. Whereas with Don and Roger, it's a little different. And in this episode, to its credit, I think that it explores and kind of examines too a little bit of like what really motivates Don's affairs. Like, why does he have affairs? It's something that like we've kind of gotten a little bit of like hints in previous episodes, because we've seen that Don is kind of particular about certain things. Like, people have made the observation, it was like, oh, well, he doesn't want to have like office romances, right? He doesn't want to, sort of like shit where he eats and everything. And I think that's partly it, for sure. I think it's one of those things where like he likes to compartmentalize. He's a master at like self-discipline in that sense. But another thing, though, is that I think for Don, and where the Rachel thing comes in, is he wants a challenge. He in the work life, he wants to build something for himself. He wants to, when they lose the Dr. Scholl's account in this episode, he like freaks out. Like he like wipes stuff off his desk. It feels like it's such a failure for him, right? And then romantically, I think he's in he has a similar sort of interpretation of like what he gets out of an affair, because he's not so easily seduced. He's not like Roger, who seems to be motivated by something a little bit different on like what it means to build something from nothing, because Roger was born into privilege. Roger is somebody who, he couldn't be a self-made man. There was no way for him to do that. So for him, being self-made means getting his daughter to love him. And it's why he's obsessed with like literally like for the second time in the show, he has sex with somebody who is much younger than him and then talks about his daughter after, which is very gross. But it's something that keeps happening because it's like clearly, and like, again, it's so on the nose about this. Like, it really bugs me actually, because he literally like looks at her and says like, you're not much older than Mona. Like, why you're not angry with me? And it's just like, it's so pointed. But clearly that's like Roger's whole journey here is like, to him, being self-made means like not being lonely anymore, fighting the aging process. For Don, it's more of like, he wants to like conquer women. He wants to like have power over them. Clearly, it's why like with Peggy, like he wouldn't be with Peggy. Like when Peggy's like coming on to him, he's just like whatever. Like that's easy. But to him, something difficult would be like Rachel. Because Rachel is somebody who, as you notice with his conversations with Betty on the phone, she just keeps asking him like all these questions, and she's like fixated on what's going on with her dad and his new girlfriend. And Don is just like, I don't know. And then when he tries that with Rachel, where Rachel is just like, well, what are you doing? Why are you trying to kiss me? And he's like, I don't know. She's like, you do. Like, you do know. It's like a subtle thing that happens really fast, but it's like that's kind of the thing that makes him kind of like, that's what turns him on, I guess.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about Rachel and Don, and I think I had a little bit different read than you. I think what you're saying makes sense. I can see where you're going with him wanting to dominate and it being a challenge, but I also just think he sees himself in Rachel, and that's what really turns him on, because at the end of the day, no one loves Don Draper like Don Draper. I
totally agree with that.
Just being self-made herself, like her father, and then her strong-willedness, and exactly what you're saying, though, the juxtaposition of him calling Betty and Betty completely blowing him off and talking about these really trivial, I'm so stuck on my dad and this new girlfriend, and Don just being like, I just am not on this wavelength. I need to go see someone
trivial to him.
Who is on my wavelength. Yes, trivial to him, exactly.
Because she's green. And, clearly, like it's important, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's also something to Don. Like Don moves from thing to thing to thing, right? And this entire season, we've been Betty's mom died. Betty's not over her mom dying, and I think they keep repeating and hitting that note, and you can see it getting more and more and more and more and more to Don.
Yeah, there's a lot in this episode where Don is constantly kind of relating, either consciously or not, to older men in this episode. The first one being Gene, who he seemed to... One of the things that he doesn't seem to respect about Gene is that, he makes the comment to Betty, he's like, the guy was married for 40 years. He can't even like make himself like a cup of tea, whatever he says, right? Where Don, he clearly doesn't see himself that way. He sees himself as somebody who, doesn't need a woman to do everything for him. Like he's married and everything, but like he's way more independent. Whereas he seems to have way more respect for somebody like Abe, Rachel's father, right? Because Abe is somebody who like is a self-made man. By the way, I really pointed to of like, it's clear to me why Don would tell Rachel what he tells her at the end of the episode, because there is that moment in the meeting where Rachel's like, actually my father did come from nothing. Who here can say that? Clearly Don can't say that out loud, but like he has to get it off his chest later. So okay, Will, did you have anything to add to that? Because I know we got to talk about Joan. You already talked about like the Don stuff, but yeah, what else you got?
I guess there's a part of me that was kind of hoping we'd get a little bit more of Betty's perspective in this episode, but also, as we were suggesting, there's so much that's happening in this episode that it would just be another sort of thing to happen. It would probably take away from the episode more than add to it. But I did find it fascinating that, as you're suggesting, that there's so much explored here about family or lack thereof, and like how our relationships to our parents sort of form us or don't form us. And obviously, Betty's fraught relationship with her mother, and to a lesser extent her father, is something that drives her character, and something that we continue to see in the previous episode. But that was something I when we started the episode and we saw so much of her, I was kind of hoping we'd kind of get a little bit more to that. But like I said, I get the reason why they opted to shift away from her in this episode, but it also kind of feels like a missed opportunity at the same time. So I'm a little on the fence about that, I'll admit. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you're saying though about, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it also does make just a little bit of sense that Betty's off in her own world in this episode, because she truly, she's the most oblivious character in the entire show. And that's all her world revolves around, is what's immediately in front of her.
Yeah. I think with her, she clearly is having issues with like her dad moving on, because she hasn't moved on. And, there is like a little thing here where like clearly she's struggling. She needs to talk to somebody about this. Don is the only person that she feels like she can talk to, but Don is not emotionally available, physically available, but she still is like being a wife to him. I think it is important that that phone call they have, it does end with her being like, make sure you eat something, that of course, like her, of course, being, still looking out for him, but Don doesn't see it. He immediately runs to Rachel, and he goes to Rachel for basically like to comfort him in this crisis that he's having. There's a bunch of stuff with Joan in this episode. Before we go to the Joan stuff, though, quickly with Peggy, we get a little bit of a check-in. She has a great line here with Pete, and I think I really like it because I think that it's just like it's so calm and rational, and she just like politely like lays him out and eviscerates him here because like he comes to her and he's just like, why are you, he's like whining to her because she's basically not like falling at his knees and like worshiping him, I suppose, but she's just like, well, what do you want? Like she's like, I don't know if you like me. It's just like she's just being so clear and concise about it, and when he tries to like throw barbs in her or try to be like, look, I'm married, blah, blah, blah. She's just like, yeah, you told me how confusing that can be. I mean, she's quick. And I think there's something about how the writing has kind of emboldened her. It's made her feel a little bit like, I don't have time for this. Like she's kind of lost her patience with him. And I love to see it. It's really satisfying.
And it's also just, it feels natural too. Cause like she stood up for herself in other episodes, but there is still like that like kind of teary eyed look that she'll have, like that scene with Joan, either an episode or an episode before that, where she has like, she sticks up for herself, but it is a little bit shaken. And in this episode, she has much more of a strong will. There is still that vulnerability that Elisabeth Moss brings to Peggy, but yeah, I agree with you 100% though, that in this episode, she seems like she's really kind of firming that backbone of hers, and she's not afraid to dish it out a little bit, especially for someone like Pete, a man who will never have a backbone ever, I presume.
She had the second best line delivery for me in this entire episode with, or should I lay down the couch to remind you? I thought that was just like, it's a good line, but even a great delivery. It was so like strong and fierce and a little bit sassy, and you could tell it like it hit Pete so deep.
Yeah. Was your number one line when God closes the door, he opens a dress?
That's an honorable mention. But I literally love the line delivery of Don slapping Roger and saying, your wife's name is Mona.
Yeah, in front of the paramedics. But I mean, like, it is such an important kind of touch, isn't it? Because, I mean, one of the things that pushes Don to reach out to Betty at all is the fact that he sees Roger with his family. And like, I think the fact that he doesn't get from Betty what Roger gets from his wife is what kind of freaks him out even more and makes him go to Rachel and basically try to like reset with her. They do finally hook up, and I don't know. What do you make of that whole thing? Will, like, do you remember a lot from the Rachel stuff in this season? Like, do you have a sense of what's ahead?
You mean for the episodes to come up?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. I don't think so. Not that I recall. Mainly the stuff I remember from this point forward relates to Peggy, I'll say. And, Dawn a little bit too, but mostly Peggy. So,
okay.
I don't think anything else besides what we've seen already is sticking out with me as far as Rachel is concerned. But I might change my tune if like I'm watching a future episode. I'm like, oh yeah, that scene,
Sure. All right. So the Joan stuff.
I think Don pulled
Mike,
sorry.
go ahead.
Okay, Joan, never mind. No, I thought we were going to talk about the Rachel
please.
scene. We can definitely move on to Joan.
No, let's finish up with the Rachel scene, then we'll go to Joan. Let's do it.
Yeah. I think that Don pulls the ultimate scumbag move, like male manipulator of the century move of like throws himself at her, is going to do whatever he wants to do, like clearly is over for a purpose. But then right before it happens, he says, only if you want me to, right? Because then it's, in his mind, her decision. And if they regret it afterwards, he can totally blame her. It's not, he didn't say yes. She wanted it.
He has like a warped view of consent, basically. But yeah.
Just to make himself feel better.
I think part of that too is that like for him, it won't, like, that's kind of what I was saying before. It's like, it won't satisfy him unless he convinces himself or has a reason to believe that she really wants to and that she's not doing it out of pity. I think that's the thing that's going to be what makes him sort of get what out of this, what he gets out of it ultimately, because he's not like Roger in a sense. Like Roger seems to be doing this, not even because of lust necessarily, but to prove something, to prove that he's not getting too old, that he can be with, beautiful women and do all of that. Don is totally different. It's like Don can be with beautiful women, but he wants to be with like women at his level, or he wants to be with women that he wants to earn it, essentially, not just like be with somebody because like they're attracted to him, and he's probably attracted to them. So with that, we can go to the Joan stuff, and the Joan stuff frustrates me the most. I think that, again, like I just think the thing with Carol and like this subplot, I just don't think connects as gracefully or naturally to the Roger and Dawn stuff. And it's not, and I think Christina Hendricks is clearly doing a great job here. I think that she's like really like kind of like subtly like mean. Like there's this whole thing where Carol basically comes out to her and confesses her love for Joan. Joan kind of brushes her off, and sort of in like a slight retaliation. This is my read. I want to hear what you guys have to say if you agree or disagree. But my read of like why she brings back those two like really unattractive looking dudes who are sort of like the inverse twins of like the twins that we get in with Roger and Dawn, right? It felt to me like Joan was literally being like to Carol, like, I would rather sleep with either of these pathetic dudes than with a woman.
I gotta push back to that. Well, for one, rude. I mean, what did those guys ever do to you, John? Extremely.
I mean, they're clowns. They're lame. They're duds. They make Harry Crane look attractive.
Extremely unattractive. You could have just said like, they're out of her league or something. You didn't have to
it's a combination. It's like they're kind of schlubby, and also their personalities are atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, they're a bit of a, some gross hound dogs. I'm not going to champion their characters, but, I'm not going to disparage their looks.
Yeah, the guy's literally being like, racist against Polish people. I mean,
Sure.
like they really like drive it home,
Sure. But in any case, I didn't really see it so much as her really sticking it to Kate as much. Or sorry, is it Carol? And I think the actress.
Carol.
Sorry, I think the actress is named Kate Norby, if I'm not mistaken.
The way to remember it is like it's basically like the unhappy version of Carol, the movie, the 2015 film.
Sure, yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. I mean, I think for me, I do agree to some respect as far as like I think there was more to explore there that didn't really get its full due with this episode. I think that scene with Carol and with Joan is actually quite moving in its own little way. I love the way the camera sort of lingers on the mirror and it shows her expression. And it's not like overdone. Like there was an easy temptation with a scene like that to go a little bit melodramatic, and I like that it's a little bit more subdued. But as far as the affair is concerned, I saw it more as her Joan, trying to find some sort of replacement for Roger. Like there's in this episode, there's a parallel between Roger is like using the twins to kind of get his mind off of Joan. He can't sleep with her. Like they're having a little bit of a tiff. So he's going younger. He's kind of being his own little hound dog. And she's going older and trying to find these two guys to kind of, find a supplement for Roger. And obviously neither of them are really getting what they want out of the exchange. Maybe Roger more so than Joan. But I thought that worked fine. Like I understood the logic with that. But I did kind of feel like, I think Carol's dynamic is sort of similar to not only their dynamic, but also with Dawn in the sense that like they all kind of personifying themselves as far as like what society wants them to be, but they're holding back their own personal interests in some respect. Like they're holding back something that for whatever reason they can't really voice to another person or to anyone else. And I like that, Dawn's the only one here that ultimately kind of gets that moment. But I think there's a seed of idea there with Carol that I think is really tender and moving. And I agree it doesn't get its full due, like I said. But I don't know. I'm not going to say that it wasn't warranted in this episode.
Yeah, I guess to me, it comes off like Joan is kind of doing both. Like, I do think that she is sort of like frustrated with the whole Roger thing, but I don't necessarily think that she's trying to replace him necessarily. I think to me, it's more of like she's just what Joan is trying to prove, I guess, is that she doesn't need Roger or whatever, which sure. But I think in Roger's case, like I don't think he's hung up on Joan as she is up on him at this point. I think that like for him, it's way more about his daughter. Like, I really don't think that like Joan is, because Joan's not the person he's clearly thinking about in all of this. He's not saying, like, if he had been saying Joan's name instead of Mirabelle on like in front of the paramedics, then I'd be like, okay, clearly like, you know, there's something there. He's also not saying his daughter's name. He's saying Mirabelle, who's sort of like the avatar for his daughter in this case, which is again gross. But I mean, I think that's what it's going for.
If he had done that, wouldn't that go against your earlier point that the too many things this episode are too on the nose?
Well, that's the thing, is like, I think that in this case, like him saying Mirabelle is a case where it's done right, because in that case it's not on the nose. But I think it would have been on the nose if he had said Joan. I'm just disagreeing with you that I don't think he's as hung up on Joan.
I guess
I'm not saying he should be.
Okay.
I actually think it fits the apartment archetype, right? Because Sheldrake, you know, clearly doesn't care about, you know, Shirley MacLaine's character. He clearly has like all these affairs in the movie, and then Shirley MacLaine is the one who's like, you know, clearly having issues.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying. I guess for me, ultimately, what Joan is doing is a little bit more complex than what Roger's doing. Ultimately, Roger's just trying to get his rocks off, I think. I
think that, I don't think it's pure lust for the guy. I think that he has a complex with his daughter, and to me that is pretty interesting.
He has a complex with women in general, but yeah, his daughter certainly feeds into it.
Sure.
His age and his inability to access his youth is certainly quite paramount, to be sure.
It must be frustrating considering he's such a charming person. He seems to be so good with people, you know, but this one person in his life, he can't seem to get to love him or to see him, right? Or he can't see her because she is, you know, his daughter, and she is just somebody who is resistant to his charms. And, you know, maybe there is something in the way that like Joan has become resistant to his charms, and that probably threatens him, not on a personal level for, you know, affection he has for Joan as a person, but more so what Joan represents, if that makes sense.
Well, certainly I don't think Joan would ever admit it, but she is getting emboldened by Peggy in some respect or another.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So
you definitely see like the influence starting to sort of like creep up. I think MZS mentions that too, doesn't he?
I think so. I mean, it's apparent just from that scene where they're talking about the apartment. Like what she says does sound like something that Peggy would also kind of say in a similar conversation. So, you know, it just seems like Peggy's getting under Joan's skin in some respect or another. She will never admit at this point, but it's happening.
Right. All right. What about you, Mike? What do you think of the Joan stuff?
I think I would have cared a little bit more if like I had more investment into Carol. I think I agree with what Will is saying in regards to the moment was tender and touching, especially for the time period it was in. I thought it was a very realistic situation, and I loved the scene. But I get what you're saying, John, about your critiques of it. I also just want to go on record to say I also don't think that Roger's as hung up on Joan as Joan is on him. Roger does not think about her unless she is right there in front of him, or Mona is gone for the weekend and he thinks, oh, I can spend it with Big Red. That's, I think, about as far as his thoughts about Joan go at this point.
Are we fans?
Is this the first episode we see Mona?
No, we saw her. She met Don a few episodes ago with Mona. Or you're talking about Margaret, right?
You're right.
Yeah.
Is it the same actress? Though it looked like
same actress.
Okay.
So when are we fans or not of when Roger's walking with Joan and being like, I got to get to the bottom of that. I need to get a real good look at those. Whatever he says. Yes, no, slapstick comedy. Anyway, this is not a very funny episode.
I think I say I say I'm a fan. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sort of trying to bring it the point where like Mad Men is usually pretty like funny whenever Roger's a big presence in an episode, and he's kind of not in this. And I think there's a lot of like really cringeworthy moments here. I think all of the stuff with the twins, I hate it. Like to me, it's like it's gross. Like, and I know it's supposed to be. I know it's what it's going for, but it's just to me, it's like a slog. Like I just hate those scenes. I hate, you know, Roger's interactions with them, and I hate Don's interaction with Eleanor. It's just not that interesting to me. I'm like, just move on. And then I guess that's a purely like, I just, that's probably one of the biggest things with this episode for me, is like it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And not that I don't think that it shouldn't, because like that's how the scenes were designed. It just doesn't quite work for me in terms of like just entertainment, because like I think other episodes are able to sort of like send these messages across without being hard to watch, I guess. But do you guys agree, disagree, in the middle? I don't know.
I mean, I'll just say that I don't disagree. I just think the episode maybe works a little bit better than you're giving it credit. But it's not like, I don't think this is a top 5 episode of the season. I do think it is a little patchy, as we've been discussing. I think it's a little blatant in ways that other episodes have been a little bit more subtle, or maybe a little bit more nuanced in their commentary. But I do, the stuff that we've been championing, I think really does work. So I don't want to disparage it or act like some of those ideas aren't quite as impactful as you might be making them sound like. But yeah, I guess that's where I agree, but also disagree with you.
I think my overall thoughts, I don't think it's a top 5 episode. I do think it's a really solid episode, and I think what it was trying to do in the in the season-long story that Mad Men is was really solid. I love where the episode left us. I love the arc that Roger was on this episode, and I really love the moment with Don being really vulnerable and really weak, but thinking it was, him being strong, right? I really like that moment with Rachel and how they foil each other. And I think it really sets up the end of the season, which we can obviously talk to when we get it. But I think the episode was done well, and it did what it was supposed to do.
It's a functional episode because it's driving us along to the climax of the season, which is really important. We know that it's headed for the election. We only have a few episodes left in the season. So I do think that it's doing what it's supposed to do as an episode of the season. It just had some elements that irked me. But yeah, in terms of, I guess as we can kind of wrap this up, because not a lot happens in this episode. It's kind of easy to kind of like run through it, really.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say we kind of glossed over the twin thing, but it seems like you might be doing that deliberately.
Glossed over it?
I don't know. It just feels like there's some stuff there that I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit, just because I feel like that's where the episode is probably at its most memorable and maybe most provocative.
What did you want to bring up?
Well, I was just kind of curious to hear, because you said that this was a largely humorless episode, but there are some moments in here that seem maybe, and this is just an honest question, it seems like some moments in here maybe are meant to be darkly comedic, but it's kind of hard to maybe recognize that as much now, because it's
the only funny moment I saw was like when the guys were trying to hit on the casting couch people.
Well, that's
and,
what I mean.
They're terrible at it.
Right. I'm just saying, like, we're watching this now during like the Me Too movement, and it's like it's harder to watch like stuff like that.
Are we like post Me Too at this point?
I don't really know. I'm not gonna say we're post, because it feels like that, like we've succeeded or whatever, when it's obviously like still an ongoing thing.
I don't think that's what it means at all. I think that it's like
to me that's what it sounds like. That's why I don't like saying meet posts. It's like people. Gotcha. It's like people who say like we're post pandemic, but it's like obviously the pandemic is still happening. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of like
we're
the pandemic is still happening.
Yeah, we've just transitioned into pandemics, I guess now. We've kind of multitude the pandemics.
Sorry, I cut you off before.
No, I was just saying that like I was wondering from your perspective, like if this episode was maybe supposed to be a little bit funnier in a dark way in those moments, but just it's not as easy for us to like maybe recognize whatever comedic moments would have been there, because stuff like that is just obviously, if it was funny before, it's definitely not funny now. So
I just think it's gross.
I was deeply uncomfortable in that scene. It's hurt in her voice when she says, "Why does everybody always ask us that?" I was just like, it was hard to watch.
I did have a DiCaprio pointing at the TV screen moment when she said, "Everything he says means something else too," and I'm like, Mad Men.
Sure. But that seems like a comedic moment. That's what I'm kind of saying, is that like that's like a joke. It's kind of a throwaway one. But obviously the scene's so uncomfortable.
There are sprinkles.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. It's like, but that scene entirely is much more uncomfortable to watch now that like stuff like that can be harder to That's what I'm trying to get at, basically.
Especially because it's a scene where like nobody really wants to be there. Roger is exerting his power. Like as soon as Don tries to leave, he's like, no one's going anywhere. You know, it's just like, yeah,
and
I don't like it.
And especially because like we're saying, like one of the grosser things that happens or attempts to happen with Roger's episode was something that has been at the source of controversy related to one high profile director. I don't know if I should get into more details, but you can probably figure them out if you're in the know. I don't know if Mike knows what I'm talking about. Maybe we can discuss it off the air, but it's hard not to think about stuff like that, obviously, now when you watch an episode or a scene like this. And it's just like, yeah. I mean, we've said it already, but just gross. Just gross.
Yeah, very gross.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention before when I was talking about how like Don wants a challenge. I do think that like Don saw Betty as a challenge when they first met. We kind of got that like sort of story from Betty already a few episodes ago, or an episode ago actually, when she was just like, oh yeah, I rejected Don at first, and like that's probably, you know, a big reason why he probably fell in love with her and wanted to marry her in the first place was because, you know, that was the ultimate challenge to him. It was like somebody who was born rich and he could like sort of marry into that. It was like an ultimate proving. But then now at this point, he's like, she's submissive to him. He doesn't like respect her. He views her as a child, as other episodes have established. So wanted to get out of the way real quick. Is there anything left to go through? I mean, there's a lot of stuff we didn't go into super thoroughly. I know the election stuff, but I feel like there's a lot of setup going for that. We got the whole Menken scene, which, there's some interesting stuff there, but nothing like super noteworthy, I don't think. Do you have anything else, Mike?
Don't waste your youth on age.
Oh,
isn't that what he says to Joan in the elevator?
Yeah. Don't waste your youth on age.
That was my really bad impersonation. That's so much better. Let me try again. Don't waste your youth on age. I don't know. That.
Roger Sterling suffered a heart attack. He survived it, but he's currently being hospitalized.
What a shitty situation for Joan. Outside of like it being Roger and her being sad, I was just thinking of it from a practical standpoint. I would rather die than have to sit at a typewriter and listen to that old man dictate letters to every client and me have to type them up. That's like, if you're ever wondering what's the worst task I can assign to Michael, it's that one.
Yeah.
Also,
Joan, I need you to write this down. The man you love is nearly died. Now do that again 50 more times.
Also, come in on a holiday weekend to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh man, yeah, it's just spooky too. Like when Joan like walks up and like you see Bert just like sitting there, kind of, kind of freaked me out a little bit, honestly. But
why would she bring that guy though? I don't know. Not important.
I was gonna bring him up just because like he was still trying to like make it work to his favor. He's just like, you could need somebody here,
Yeah, if there's nobody in the office, like they could maybe finish what they started. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, he was.
What if you're with Christina Hendricks?
Well, sure.
There you go. I mean,
I'd be like, I will change the paper in your typewriter. Yeah, true. Damn.
Yeah. Anything else, guys?
Trying to think. I don't know if there's like you said. I mean, there's.
Oh, I have one thing.
Oh, okay.
I think that it is kind of interesting how the episode opens with Don kind of having that moment with his daughter. Him having like a fun little joke with Sally. And then so much of the episode is about how Roger can't seem to connect with his daughter. So it's interesting foreshadowing.
Sure. I'd agree with that. Yeah.
They also mentioned Psycho in this episode.
Yeah, the Psycho stuff, I kept thinking about it. I was like, okay, you do kind of have Don sort of knocking on Rachel's door. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of like a Norman Batesy kind of thing to him. I don't know. I think it's a stretch.
It was a writer's thing. I read about it. It's just because Roger's wife is also his wife in real life, and she's related to somebody who is in Psycho. And that's it.
Well, there's a nice thing too in this episode where, I read that there were people who initially were like, "Oh, Psycho hadn't come out yet in September 1960." So it was like, "Oh, it's a goof." But actually, in New York, they had screenings, like early screenings of Psycho. So it is possible for Roger to have already seen it. So Nice little extra detail there.
Did you send me that poster of Psycho on purpose because of that, John? Because you sent me that Times Square Psycho now playing. Oh,
maybe. Well, I mean, you can't trust me, Michael Overhauls. Everything I say means something else too.
John.
I think we've about hit the end of our rope on this one, but we're going to be back next week to talk about what's the next one. I think Indian Summer. That's episode 11, right?
I think so.
I think that's what we're going to do next. We only have 3 episodes left of season 1. We're really almost done with the season, guys. Can you believe it? Like we're almost a 1/7 of the way through this experiment, and I know. The time is a wheel, I suppose. So, anyway,
the best is yet to come.
And one thing, if you want to connect with us, if you have any questions or you want to discuss the show with us, best way to do that right now is on Twitter. We have a Twitter account. We'll link it in the show notes, but it's Men Pod. I think Men Pod. I actually forget what the handle is, but it's something like that. You'll find it in the show notes. But yeah, hit us up if you have any questions or you want to, don't spoil Will Ashton on what happens in the show. Again, he hasn't seen it, except for I guess we're coming up like pretty soon. Well, we're going to get into uncharted territory for you, like totally uncharted. That's exciting.
I think because I've seen the first episode of season 2. So, but after that,
you're always moving the goalposts. It's always just like we're going to be on like season 5, and you're going to be like, no, well, I did watch this. I technically did see this season 2.
I don't think I've moved the goalpost beyond I had to remember whether or not I watched the season premiere, but I did remember watching that on Netflix at one point, and I was I got to finish the show up, and I just never did. So I can say with some confidence that that's the last full episode of Mad Men that I saw.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
So you never got to when they did the crossover with Riverdale?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get to there yet. That was quite a surprising thing from what I've heard.
It's so good, though. We'll get there. We'll get there.
I know you're trying to wrap up the show, John, but did we want to talk about how we got our first review of the show, or do you just want to save that for later?
Oh, let's save that for later. That's a can of worms, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's interesting conversation there, but
well, we got to go because of you, Will.
I know.
You're running late, so
all right, man.
We'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks as always for listening. We'll be back, and until the next one, I have an elevator to catch, so I'll see you guys.